Hello. I just want to introduce our speaker for today, who's Laura Eise. Hey, Allie. I had the pleasure of teaching Laura when she was here at CMC many years ago, and one of the joys of teaching at CMC is that I watch my students go off and do amazing and interesting things, and then I can invite them to come back here and speak to you. So Laura is a joy as a student, and she's a joy as an adult now, and is coming to talk to you about something that very few people have a real and impressive expertise in. You got to hear, if you were here last week, a very well-known speaker on the issue of cyber crime and cyber threats. Laura's going to come with a slightly different perspective, and I think a more contemporary perspective on the issue, which is very valuable. Laura's experience has brought her around the world. She's worked with foreign governments. She's worked a full range of industries. She's worked with our government. And so her expertise on issues of cyber crime, cyber threats, cyber concerns, and cybersecurity more generally really spans the full range of the problem. And today she's going to be focusing now on cybersecurity and the automobile industry. If you're available later today, she's also going to be speaking more generally on cybersecurity with the Claremont International Relations Society at 4:15. So I want to welcome Laura back to CMC. I'm so happy to have her here, and welcome her to the podium.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Everyone hear me okay? Yep. All right, great. So today I'm going to talk about cybersecurity in the automotive industry, which will hopefully be a little bit more interesting than what you hear like on your stereotypical cybersecurity concerns and theft, privacy, breaches and whatnot. So I'll probably talk for about 20 minutes, but I'd love for you to interrupt at any point if you have questions. And at the end, I'll just open it up to more general questions you might have on cybersecurity, whether or not it relates to the automotive industry. All right. So, the driving experience has changed. The cars that we drive now are not the way that they used to be, and the cars that are on the market right now are different than the ones actually that we're driving at the moment, some of us. So if you have a used car, for example, like me, my car is not as connected as the cars that are on the market. And so as we all begin buying new cars or just moving more into this, the era of the connected vehicle, this concern will be applicable to all of us, whether it is right now or whether it will be in the future. So I want to share with you a little bit about how the vehicle and why the vehicle or the vehicles that we drive is actually potentially facing cybersecurity threats. So what we have here is what we call point A to point B reimagined. But essentially, it's just showing the different ways that the car is now connected to the internet and cyber, just part of the cyber universe in general. So you see, imagine this car, not looking very fancy, but when you go into your car now, oftentimes you can connect your cell phone. You can sync up your applications to your car. You can play your Pandora station. You can play what music you have. You also can you could even sync up movies. Hopefully not you're watching them, but maybe your kids. Navigation and location-based services. This is particularly applicable because these platforms and providers often capture your data, so your driving history, where you go, what you do. Real-time performance monitoring. So I think we've all had that light turn on in our car, the check engine light, which freaks us all out, at least me. And then we go to take our car into the shop and they will reset the computer, which is how they turn off, or they'll run the diagnostics to see what's going on. So that's just a glimpse into what the real-time performance monitoring is in the cars that we drive now, and even more so the cars that are on the market now and we will be driving in the future. In addition, we also have mobile devices that I mentioned that connect, and this is not mainstream by any means, but we even now have some of the self-driving cars. So you'll see some of the more forward-leaning auto companies touting their self-driving cars. So you have 4G, you have third parties like OnStar who can run updates and recommend services in real time. Remote connectivity is used for software and firmware updates, and apps can sync to the car, as I mentioned. So any questions on how we see the car now part of the cyberspace, cyber era? Questions? Okay, great. So essentially, what we have is an iPhone on wheels, is the easy way to put it. So the connected vehicle is here. The question is, what do we do with it? So the new relationship creates many exciting business opportunities. So you have enhanced user experience, new services, expanded sales landscape, valuable customer data, and deepened customer product connection. We all want that seamless integration between our technologies that we don't always get, and we're starting to see it more, but with that comes a whole bunch of other concerns in the cybersecurity realm, such as the inherent risks of disrupted vehicle operations. So somebody can actually hack into your car now and honk the horn, unlock or lock. Depending on the car, you could even steer if you break into the car. So that's definitely a huge concern. Customer data loss. Your driving history, your credit card information, your personally identifiable information, if you have keyed into your GPS where your home is, all this information is there to be stolen. Degraded services, violation of privacy, I just touched on that, and maybe less applicable to us personally, but to the automotive industry, a big concern is government intervention and increased regulation. So I'll touch on that in just a little bit. All right, so to go into a little bit more of the cybersecurity concerns that we see in the automotive industry, part of the reason I thought that this would be a particularly interesting topic is because the auto industry actually hasn't faced a big hack yet, unlike pretty much every other industry. So retail, financial services. I think I actually have a slide I'll show a little bit later about that. But all of these are applicable to the automotive industry, so we're starting to see all of these attacks and threat vectors come to the vehicle. And so right now what I show here is just the world and connected lines, because cyberspace does not have geographical boundaries. It's different than pretty much any other domain or space or area you could have for criminal attacks, for pretty much all international relations type things you see where they're typically have the geographical boundaries are no longer applicable. So in 2010, you probably have heard this quote before. The Economist stated, "After land, sea, air, and space, warfare has entered the fifth domain, cyberspace." What I want to show here is I promise this is the most consultancy slide I will show you, but this shows what the threat environment looks like. And it's at a pretty high level, but I want to walk you through it so you have a better familiarity of what we're looking at in the auto industry. So in the upper quadrant, in our industry, we typically talk about four main groups of attackers. We have the criminal groups. So those they could be pretty much anywhere, and they are anywhere. They oftentimes different criminal organizations will sync up with each other to create bigger groups, criminal syndicates, and you see them working together to steal information, to steal credit cards, to hack into different companies and accounts. You also see nation states. This is much, much more prevalent. You see them from Russia to China, kind of across the board. And they're essentially funded by their governments, trained by their governments, and then given particular tasks or places to hack into. This is where you often see advanced persistent threat, which is where you'll have a threat actor sitting on your network, undetected, just stealing information as you go. Very common in most industries. Insider threat, that is both malicious and accidental. You actually see accidental insider threats as one of the most common that we face in our industry. We often say that the biggest vulnerability is between your seat and your computer screen. I think we've all We've all made a few errors in our day about sharing passwords or accidentally downloading viruses. The reason that this is applicable to automotive is because it's not just hacking into the car that this industry has to worry about. It's also all the customer information and data that you have, and it's not as glamorous as you would think taking over the car, but it's definitely a concern, especially because manufacturing rely heavily on the supply chain. And so in the supply chain, you have a lot more room for error because you don't have as much insight into what the different companies and vendors in your supply chain are doing, and they're oftentimes not doing it to their cybersecurity to the level that you want them to be. And then we have the hacktivists and terrorists. So yes, hacktivist is actually a word. And these are typically, you see anonymous as one of this part of this group, but they're often trying to make a statement, bragging rights. Traditionally, hackers tended to be mostly in that group. So the traditional image of the overweight gentleman in the basement eating Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew, that's where that stereotype came from, but very, very different now than it was before. Any questions about the 4 big groups of attackers we're looking at? And this is not just automotive industry, this is also across all of our industries. Go ahead.
Which one would you say, in your opinion, is like the biggest threat?
To the automotive industry or just in general?
In general, like for example, from past history, it's been shown that like nation states don't really like engage in cyber attacks if they're not in a time of fear or contention. So like in terms of insider threat with governments, do you think that's like a cause for more priority of behavior?
Sure. So in case you didn't hear, his question was what do I think is the most dangerous that we're facing right now? And so a little bit of a cop-out, but I think it really depends on what industry you're in. So in general, my default would say that the nation state is the most dangerous because they have the most resources behind them. And they will you don't know you often don't know that they are implementing an attack. So you don't know that you are having your information stolen. It's hard to quantify the economic damage that happens when you're losing like trade secrets and things like that. So with regards to this, how much damage could occur, I would say nation state. They could, take down many, many critical infrastructure. You saw it in Stuxnet that it's real and can happen. We could have all of our traffic lights turned off. And that's just one of the least malicious things that could occur. So I think the most impact could come from nation state. The most common, probably insider threat. Mm-hmm. So that's the one. Oh, go ahead. Sure.
How much cooperation
Oh, good question. So the question was how much convergence do you see between them, or I'm assuming you mean like do they partner up or do they work together? Sure. So you do see, you can see the insider threat. They can pair up with any of the other ones because they'll be motivated for many different reasons, and it's somewhat easy to approach them. So you have a disgruntled employee, you have somebody who needs money, you have somebody, they can pair up with any of those, and they probably will. Most of them, with the exception of maybe the hacktivists or the terrorists, the nation states and the criminal groups will definitely be looking for those people who have the inside access, so they can get the what we call administrative rights. So essentially, once you have that, you can jump all around the network. So you'll see insiders working with all of them. Criminal groups, as I mentioned, will work with each other. I think you do see them occasionally working with nation states. It's just not as widely acknowledged because there would be a crime. So I think those are the big ones for how you see the interplay. But I'll let you know if something else comes. Okay, cool. Questions? All right, so we have attackers are varied and evolving. We also have attacks are increasing in frequency and potency. So I mentioned that we have here, it says greater than any other sector. So manufacturing is uniquely vulnerable to attacks because I mentioned the supply chain. So you have many, many different parts and pieces touching your organization. For example, with the automobile, you have almost all automakers will be transferring your driving history and your data to a third-party provider. And they might sell that information, they might just sit on it, they might use it for their own data analysis, but they don't have regulations around how they have to protect it. And so I'll touch on this later, but there's actually a report, let me see if I can find it. It's called the Ed Markey report, and it's essentially from the Senate talking about how they are trying to create some of their own voluntary agreements for how to protect information, but right now there really isn't. So if you have a third-party provider who doesn't protect your information, doesn't have the typical controls you see, so like firewalls and whatnot in place, it's very easy for that information to get lost. And that's actually what you saw at Target, was that a third-party vendor, it was their connection that created the loophole so that they could get access to all of the different credit card information. You see, this is a little bit outdated statistic from 2013, but you see the average number of successful cyber attacks per company in the US is about 200 times per year. It happens all the time. It's just that they're oftentimes pretty small, or they don't even know, so you don't get the big reports like you do at Target. The consequences of the attacks are high. We see this very, very loud and clear at Target, with the CEO and the CIO asked to leave after a cyber breach. This did not used to be the case. This is a big change from the way that this stereotypical IT policy, where if there was a breach, you would just fire someone in IT, and that was it. And now half the board gets asked to leave. So it's becoming a much, much more critical and important issue. You see the average cost of a data breach, again, from 2013 can be 3.5 million, but it really varies. And it's hard to identify what actually the cost is of a damage to your reputation. And so some people will say that this is actually a low estimate. And to add to that, the future will be more complex. We talked about this already with the connected car, obviously. Identities are shifting. More of our personal information is on the internet. And government expectations will rise. So cybersecurity is now becoming more of a focus and will just continue to be so. Any questions about this? Let's try to give a quick overview of a complex environment. So go ahead.
When you say government expectations will rise, do you think the private sector will be doing more of the cybersecurity work?
Could you clarify?
I think we would depend more on government to implement cybersecurity standards, organizations or things private companies like Claremont.
Okay, interesting. So his question was, if I heard it correctly, was in going forward, do we think the government will be doing more of the cybersecurity initiatives, or will the private sector be stepping in to fill the gap? Is that right? So I think it's I think it's both. I think that as we look forward, right now cybersecurity is somewhat of the wild, wild west, and we don't actually take very much personal responsibility for protecting our information. And I think that will change as expectations evolve. So, for example, in the physical domain, if you don't lock your door, insurance is not going to pay you if somebody comes in and steals everything in your house. We have no expectation like that right now. So if you share your password with somebody, or your password is really bad, or you use it for everything, there is no, and you get your information is stolen, or somebody uses your credit card, you're not held accountable for that. And I think that that's right, and that's good right now, but I think that will change. And there will be expectations that the consumer will have more responsibility for protecting their online presence. So I think it will be partially just become everybody's responsibility. But I think that you will see more We'll see more government. I'm imagining that things will shift within the government, and you will see more emphasis on cybersecurity. The FBI does a lot right now, for example, but I think that'll probably, actually hard to say, but it might they might split off and become their own group. I'm not sure. That's all hypothetical. I don't actually have any insight into that process, but and I also think that there will continue to be the same like private industry who get, either are doing contracting or doing security on their own. I have one more point and then I'll take your question. What you do see a lot right now, which is a little bit different, is that private industry is really pushing to create their own standards because they don't want the government to tell them what to do. So that's a little bit different than how some of our other traditional security functions work. That help? Okay, sort of.
Because aren't cyber attacks mostly on certain vulnerabilities, and with the private sector doing like responding fast and the opposite.
Sure. Well, it's a little, so he said was 0-day vulnerabilities or exploits, which is essentially you don't even know that you can be attacked until all of a sudden you are. It's not out, and there's no information out there. So I lost my train of thought. Sorry. I'll have to come back to that because it totally just flew out of my brain. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I had a kind of similar question. Do you think it's feasible for private industry to take the lead without the absence of government regulation? Or do you think government regulation is something that will definitely be necessary?
I'm not sure. Did everyone hear that question? Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm not sure. I think that private industry will always try to save as much money as they can. I think they really want to get ahead of the problem, though, and I think they realize like the actual dangers and then damage that can happen. What do you all think? Anyone have opinions on that topic? Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Sure. I remembered what I was going to say. So I think that you actually are seeing a little bit more information sharing than you did before. And you have what we call the ISACs, information sharing and analysis centers, that are popping up across pretty much all industries, like retail and automotive too, oil and gas. So you're starting to see more effort and push in that direction within the private sector to work together. So maybe not. And I also think that some of the smaller to medium-sized businesses, they just don't have the same concerns because they're not as big of a target. They still have to have their what we call security hygiene, but they don't have to worry quite as much. So it doesn't put them at quite the same disadvantage as a large company would because they're not facing quite the same level of threat. I can answer your question now, but go ahead.
Like for cybersecurity, it's an exception because governments are less likely to share information with other governments. But in like private sector, they kind of like help each other out. Like in the past, when like in the case of the attack on Estonia, the private sector ended up doing most of the work.
Mm-hmm.
The US government did it.
And this is what I was going to touch on before that totally fell out of my brain, was that it is really challenging for governments to address this issue because of the complete lack of geographical boundaries. And so it makes it, so if we don't have good relations with a country, it's very hard to go after a cyber criminal who may have committed a crime on an American citizen in the United States, but is located in a different country. And so it makes it, to your point, very much more difficult for governments to go after those criminals if there's not good relations. So that automatically makes it more difficult. Private companies have much less restrictions around that, so they will be willing, but they won't be proactively going against cyber criminals. So the ability to cut across those boundaries is important and critical for multinational companies. But there's just a lot that remains to be seen on how this will all play out. And I think it will contribute significantly to the changing world order and how we work with our neighboring countries and all around the world. Those we get along with and those we don't. Go ahead.
I think in the last few years we've seen a preponderance of more high-profile attacks, cyber attacks, and so it seems like it's more visible in the media, people are more aware of it. Do you think there'll be a point where there's pushback from consumers who don't want their data to be captured because of that fear that it is more vulnerable to attack, especially in these like new industries that are breaking in, like automobile? Or do you think we're on a train that's just moving forward?
I think we're on a train that's moving forward. I think that the convenience and the way that technology is already integrated into our lives, I think that it would, I don't see anyone particularly slowing down. I think that there will be people who will speak up against it, but I don't think that it'll actually stop the tide. I mean, we are tied to our iPhones, and not just us, like everywhere in the world. Kenya they use their cell phones for banking. That's how they bank. They've actually jumped, because they lacked the critical infrastructure that we have, they actually jumped over and went straight to using their cell phones for banking, which we don't even do yet. But the ability to use technology to improve their society, they just went for it. And I don't, barring some sort of apocalypse, which hopefully doesn't happen, I think the train has left the station. Or the car has left the garage. All right. Bad jokes aside. Any more questions for the moment? Go ahead.
I wanted to ask something related to, so I didn't hear the beginning of the speech on like the hackers, but something that especially oppressive governments do is just limit like civil liberties and like freedom of expression.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is like how do you see those developing in the future? Is citizens do have ways of going around this.
Mm-hmm.
Or something like that. But then oppressive governments are also developing capabilities. Like banks, trust or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where they can increase the citizens' access to free internet. So, which side do you see? Or do you see
So the question was whether or not governments are going to use these technologies to, correct me if I'm wrong on this statement, but to sort of crack down on freedom of speech. And if we see that the connected everything pretty much will be an enabler for freedom of speech, or if it will be just used as a tool by the governments to crack down. Okay. So you see, I'm not sure how much, if anyone in this room has gone to a country where you have restricted internet access, and I have. I worked in the United Arab Emirates, and there are websites that you can't go to, and it's really bizarre. And but there were ways I could work around it. Like I couldn't download books on Amazon on my computer, but I could do it on my Kindle. So it was a pretty easy workaround in that situation. But there are countries like China, for example, or Iran that they do have websites you can't go to, or you're not allowed to visit. And I think that in some ways it enables the people, because they can more quickly and easily share information and access it and can find workarounds. But I also think it exposes like dissidents or people who do not agree in a different way, because they can be found faster and their words are out there, and so the government can find them. But do I think I would actually maybe reframe the question a little bit, in that it is less to do with whether or not their voice can get out, but it's what information you're consuming. So you may have, there's just an avalanche of data now, and it's not where do I get information, it's how do I pick out the information that I want. And so I think that actually might be the bigger challenge, is if the government is bombarding you with information, how do you pick out the information that's true? How that's true to you, or that you want to know? How do you wade through what you're hearing from all these different sources and find the information that maybe it is the dissident or the freedom of speech, the person who's sharing these like human rights breaches and whatnot. So I don't know if that helps, but I think that it's more to do with being a savvy consumer of information versus whether or not one person will have a bigger voice than the other. I think I talked myself in a circle a little bit, but hopefully that helped. And I don't have the answer to it, because it's hard to figure out what information is out there is the right information, or what's actually backed up, or so. All right, good. So we went off on some very awesome tangents that took us away from the automobile, the connected automobile. But I would encourage, these questions are really good. And I may not have all the answers, but I think just having the dialogue is pretty important. But back to cars. So the lucrative connected vehicle is a prime candidate for attack, and is now widely viewed by the industry as being at a tipping point. Because you see in the retail industry, financial services, oil and gas, they've had their big attacks. It's out there. They no longer think that they're invulnerable. The results you've had from that vary from congressional hearings to massively damaged reputations, increased federal scrutiny, customer data exposure, pretty much everything you would expect to see in that kind of scenario. But what you haven't seen yet is a big automotive breach. And this situation is a little bit unique and a little bit more worrisome, because it could actually result in like danger to your person, so loss of life. It also, the response cost of recalled vehicles could be very damaging to a company and also to our economy. Damaged reputation, it's pretty much the same as the other industries. But the reason that I wanted to show this slide, though, is that because it hasn't happened in automotive yet, it's clear that it is happening elsewhere, and the same vulnerabilities in these other industries are also with the connected vehicle. So you still have you can use the same methods to to hack into these networks. You can still have the same supply chain vulnerabilities. You see a lot of overlap here. So. Okay. Any particular questions on how these different industries may impact the automotive? Okay, checking my time. All right. So, we've talked a little bit about doom and gloom. So we have these concerns and who's going to take over our car. So what are we going to do about it? What do I see, or what do we see the automotive industry doing? What do I see my coworkers doing? Why does this matter to me as a cybersecurity consultant, and to you as a consumer of cars? So I wanted to share with you a little bit about what's happening in the industry to counteract these threats. So at my company, I work at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a big federal government consulting firm with a small commercial consulting branch, and so that's where I work. And we are working with several automakers, and we're seeing a number of different consultants, not just my company, but a number of them working with automakers to help them understand, first of all, what's going on. And so what we show here is, we call it our automotive ecosystem. So essentially all the different parts and pieces that touch the creation of an automobile. And so you see influencers, you see third parties, the infrastructure such as the dealership network. You see the different components, the features and services, the software and the hardware components, the life cycle itself, how does it get created? And so we create these maps, first of all, to wrap our own minds around it, what really touches all the different parts and pieces, but also to help our clients as well to understand what's going on. You don't see it here because it's static, but sometimes what we'll do is light up the parts where we see the biggest risk, the biggest potential for cybersecurity attacks, what the trends and themes are in the industry. So we use that to help them identify where the biggest exposures are. And we also, where typically our end result here is to show them a coordinated path to move forward to secure the connected car. And it's not as challenging or as intimidating as you might think, because again, there's a lot of overlap between the financial services, retail. The same things you would recommend to them are oftentimes a lot of what you'll see in the automotive industry. But to get into a little bit more specifics about what else is going on, I had mentioned the building of an information sharing and analysis center. So we call it an ISAC, the Automotive ISAC. I want to make sure I use the right description. So it's essentially a centralized organization that fosters and facilitates the secure sharing of actionable threat intelligence among its members. So you might see sharing of what attack occurred, what malware you're seeing more frequently. You'll see this. Oftentimes the biggest companies will be members of these, but you're starting to see medium to small sized companies as well. The biggest concern around these, though, is privacy, again. So there's concern that if they share that they were attacked and it's not been shared with the public and it gets out, there'll be reputational damage. But this is why there's been a lot of work on keeping it secure and anonymous. So you see that here. Over there I have the CEO. And basically what I'm showing, or trying to show, is that these issues are getting escalated all the way up to the top. And so being able to explain to your CEO what these cybersecurity challenges are in a way and language that they understand can be very challenging. And so that's something that you're seeing a lot of the traditional IT folks who, have their head down and mumbling about ones and zeros over and over again. You see them learning to talk the business talk. So what business impact does that have? You also see, I mentioned earlier, the Ed Markey report. He pulled together the senator. This was an initiative taken by, although it says that he himself took the initiative to do this, I'm fairly certain it came from the automotive industry itself. I think there was about 15 large automotive companies took part in it to voluntarily create their own regulation. So essentially what I mentioned before is trying to get ahead before the government tells them what they need to do. They're trying to get ahead and decide what they're going to do themselves. Essentially control your own destiny. Let's see. Oops. So why does this matter to the business, and why do they care about securing, besides all the obvious reasons? They want to protect their customers and all that other stuff. Most would say because they want to move faster and they want to move more confidently towards the future. And so I have here the flying car, which is probably a ways away still, but it's this these topics, this fast pace moving forward that will get us there. So that was my brief overview of the automotive cybersecurity in the automotive industry. I would love to take any more questions that you all might have. No, anyone? Go ahead.
You mentioned that the automotive industry is unique in the sense that it's the one industry where safety and security, the lines are a key word, because in all the other industries you could have a security breach, but that doesn't have a safe impact in terms of safety necessarily on the customers. So I was just
Okay.
assuming there is it, how far do you think we should go in terms of allowing cyber to drive changes in the automotive industry? Because if we come to the days where we have a flying car that's fully automated, and any little security breach will bring about catastrophic loss of lives, for example. So is the cost, will the benefit outweigh the cost, or should it be aligned, especially in the automotive industry where we just say no with regards to increasing, cyberizing of our cars?
So let me see if I heard you correctly. So the question is, does the connected vehicle, should we try to rein it in to protect our own security, or was it that we should we offensively go after perpetrators of cybercrimes?
So it seems to me like there is a trade-off in the automotive industry between increasing some, I would say pushing the frontier in terms of cyber, making more automated, and the safety of the consumer.
Okay.
So to what extent should we continue to allow this trend towards having more automated cars, for instance?
Sure. So the companies that I've worked with in the auto industry, their number one priority is still customer safety. They want to make sure that the people who use their cars are safe. It's the number one priority. And it's more than just rhetoric. Like that is their number one priority. So do I think that they're endangering our lives by having an increasingly connected car? I don't necessarily think so. I think that driving a car is dangerous in itself. There's accidents all the time. And actually having more automated systems potentially could make us safer. We could have less of a chance of falling asleep at the wheel, like potentially no drunk driving because you can't start your car unless you breathe into like a breathalyzer. So I actually see that there's a great opportunity to be safer with these advances, as long as that there's a cautious approach and attention paid to protecting this information and these connections. Go ahead.
So you're saying, like, you're focusing obviously on cars because
Mhm.
like, they're becoming more interconnected and there's the vulnerability of safety and the data that they contain. And there are obviously like a lot of other industries and technologies that are becoming interconnected as well. And I was wondering what other types of technologies do you think are also vulnerable? Like, I mean, let's say like the interconnectivity of like the home now. Like not
Yeah.
every house has this, but like we can control lights, and that's not very dangerous. But there's like plenty of technology for it. So I was wondering, are there any other technologies like that you think are vulnerable?
Well, so you hear the Internet of Things is like kind of a catchphrase right now, which is a little annoying, and it's because it's so all-encompassing, so it's like saying everything and nothing at the same time. But the whole point is that so many different devices, like we joke about like the smart toaster. Before you know it, our toaster is going to be connected to our internet and know what preference we have for how toasted our toast will be. So what do I see? I really do think right now the automotive industry and the connected car is considered sort of the leading edge of how we're connecting everything. But I think you can look pretty much anywhere and see that there's advances, and if there's a way to create an app for it, somebody will try. And if there's a way to implement what you're seeing, maybe one of the more interesting trends is seeing around your healthcare. You see like the Fitbits, but there's more than that. Like there's ways people will monitor their sleep. Some of the big concerns we have in hospitals are if you have like a pacemaker or you have your hospital equipment that's keeping you alive and it malfunctions or somebody hacks into it or it gets disrupted, there is significant potential for loss of life there too. So maybe that's a comparable also area where you're seeing a lot of progression, having robots now doing surgeries. So a lot of opportunity to save lives and to improve our healthcare, but also opportunity for people to take advantage of that and hack in and whatnot. Go ahead.
My husband has a car that he'll get on the street
Mm-hmm.
Some programs are, and other are really amazing things that happen unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And all I can think is that someone hacks into that and they take control of all kinds of things in the car. And that can be a threat if, if he's a dissident in Russia and doesn't like it, that's a threat. But it can also be, a criminal organization wants him to pay a fee and hacks into his car and tells him next time, if you don't pay me, we're going to crash you. And how much of that kind of individual level defense is being built into the system to be effective?
Yep. Well, that's a perfect example of where some of these big concerns are coming from, is that they're pushing software updates to cars. So for example, your navigation system, it'll be continuously updated so you can see like where the roads, how the roads are changing, whatever, which is really helpful. And I think most of us appreciate that, but it also, these software pushes leave a lot of room for someone to sneak in malware or virus. And so you're seeing now a lot more effort to put security around that, so like to encrypt that information. I'm not sure, was your question if there was a concern that there would be like a personal attack, like to profile someone? Or, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah, so you, first of all, there's at least an awareness now that this is a significant vulnerability, which I don't think that there was much acknowledgement of previously. But you are seeing encryption being put around that information. There's a lot more caution in what patches get pushed out to fix, like if there's a bug or something's a little off in the way that the system is, and they want to push out an update. There'll be a lot more testing to make sure that what they're pushing out is free of software or free of malware or any other influence. Those are pretty much the main efforts that are going on. So, yeah. Yeah. Well, you're seeing, we're starting to see a lot more, and I can sit down with you afterwards and show you some more. I'm trying to think of what would be a few good examples. I think what you're seeing for the first time is some of these automotive industries are creating a cybersecurity group, and so that hasn't happened previously. So I think there's two right now. I think it's Honda and GM have just created and stood up their own cybersecurity functions. I think you're going to start seeing that more across the industry, especially with the report that just came out that totally called everybody out on it, that they don't have cybersecurity programs. And so I think that there is more attention being paid to it, but I do think that it's a vulnerability. So go ahead, please.
How good is the ability to attribute attacks to specific parties? Are these people prosecuted or reaching?
Good question. So the question was, how are you able to, or are we able to discover who committed a cyber attack, and if these people are being prosecuted, for their, yes, thank you, for their crime. So it is challenging, but you do see it, you can track, you can do forensics analysis, and this is, you see the FBI doing this a lot, where you essentially track down what you call the internet protocol, which is an address, but you see a lot of fake internet protocols, so people will bounce around, leaving like a little breadcrumbs essentially. And so if you're very, very, very good, you can completely hide where your internet protocol came from, or what you were using to hack in. But if you have the resources, like the FBI, they'll track down and they'll just keep bouncing around and following and tugging on the threads of where this attack came from. And they can find, and often do find, who the person was. But sometimes they can't go after them because they might not be in our country. And so that's where you see, like, I believe we have a partnership with Germany where with the FBI and the German police, I'm not sure what they're called, but they, so they'll work to go after criminals together. You're seeing much more of a crackdown on cybercrime. And so there's an effort to give people who are being held accountable for cybercrimes longer prison terms than they would have in the past. But it is still difficult to, and it takes a lot of resources. And I think probably, though, the number one hindrance to that is just having the right people to do it. So there is a lack of skill. We're missing the skill set. It's very hard to find people who have these forensics capabilities. And if you do, they are probably working for a private company and getting paid a lot more. And so we have a talent gap, which all of you can fill if you feel so inclined. But I'd say that's probably the biggest issue we have, is going after cyber criminals. We just don't have the talent right now. So, yes, go ahead.
It seems to me that the military faces a similar problem with its vehicles. Its vehicles overrun networks on the internet. Is there any conversation between the private sector and the military about how to borrow ideas from each other to
Sure. Yeah. So I think the 124 episode I saw was the one where the drone got hacked. Is that 24? So, okay, so there was a military drone in the TV show that got hacked and killed a number of, I think killed some folks and blew up some trucks. And so it's definitely possible and definitely a concern. Is there a dialogue happening? I can almost guarantee that there is. I don't know the specifics on it, and I can get back to you about that. But I am almost positive that there is some sort of dialogue going on back and forth. At least, like, definitely, my company would be having that dialogue with the government. So it is a huge concern. I do think that the government tends to put more money into their cybersecurity initiatives than the private sector does, because the private sector is weighing back and forth profit margin. And so it's a balance, like to have just the right amount of security, but still that you're protecting your company and your customers, but you're also not throwing so much money into security that you're no longer competitive. So that you see in the government, they're much more willing to put money into it because they don't have those same capitalistic concerns. Some of them they still have, but not quite to the same level. So we can maybe follow up afterward, and I can try to find that information for you. Go ahead. So is it actually inserting? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Countries. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. So the United States has a list of suppliers that we are not allowed to use. So government functions are not allowed to use. So the sort of infamous one in cybersecurity is Huawei. So they're a Chinese company that essentially, like, the general notion is that they embed into almost all of their hardware different tools or ways to basically spy on whomever buys their product. And so there's just a general idea that, like, most of Africa is like basically under the thumb of China. No, in the cybersecurity sense, not in an economic way, but because they most of their equipment comes from China, and a lot of that general idea is that the firmware, or essentially like all the different parts and pieces of your computer, have embedded in them as when they were created ways to hack into your account, which is why supply chain is such a concern, because we get so many of our different parts and pieces from all over the world. And so you see companies like HP doing huge overhauls and analysis of their supply chain to make sure that they're not selling computers to the government that have Chinese infiltration in them. And I'm picking on China. There's many other countries that do that, but Huawei's the big name. Did that answer your question? Okay. Go ahead. And I think I see 3 hands, and I think that will probably hit the end of the hour. So maybe we can take these 3 questions, and then, okay, cool. Go ahead. Either one.
So, like, with the problem of attribution and the fact that now life is online, do you think this is like a new front for actual cyber warfare? Because I know there's been no reported deaths in the past for cyber attack, but now with this, someone like, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but someone's like taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
And the fact that you could like mask your attack to come from another country, do you think that could have implications?
Absolutely, and I think that the quote that I had mentioned earlier about how cyberspace is the 5th domain of warfare really is true. I think that we're going to see a paradigm shift in the way that we all function, because it's just totally different than the way that we've previously viewed warfare, and I do think that it's already happening. And I do think that there probably have been indirect deaths due to cyber attacks, just because we can't point at something and say, this hack made that light fall on that person. I think that it probably has happened. But I do like to have hope that the benefits that it will bring will be such that we'll save many more lives than lose. So. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is actually kind of similar to
Okay.
that. Are there any, to this point, any suspected attacks on individual vehicles, whether or not they have resulted in deaths of individuals? And if not, why do you think that is? Why do you think that this opportunity to sabotage potentially attacks?
Sure. So my guess is that it has happened. I know that it has happened in publicity stunts. Like, for example, Tesla had a couple folks hack into one of their cars, and so I know that it has happened. I'm not privy to the classified information, but I am assuming that my assumption would be that yes, it has happened within the government and within the military, that there have been targeted attacks on vehicles through cyber means. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have more details, but
Yeah, Richard
Yeah.
approached me several
Yeah.
months ago, and he has been vocal in the past about an incident that occurred, I don't know, in the last couple of years, where I think it was a suspected cyber attack, possibly even with implications that it originated from the government. It's all very conspiratorial, but
Okay.
resulted in the death of people.
Yeah, I would not be surprised, and I would presume that it has happened. And I can do a little research or ask some of my coworkers. It ends up getting a little bit into the fuzzy zone of, is this classified or not? And I'm assuming that yes, it has happened. So, and then we had, I think, one more question in the back. Yes.
I'm not a big tech person, so please correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
My understanding, the typical computer viruses that we are familiar with, hackers tend to like to attack the more popular operating system, which is Microsoft Windows as we know it.
Yep.
Which is why we believe Macs don't get as much viruses, even though there are. When this is applied in cars, it's also my understanding that most car manufacturers have very different systems that they are integrating. So does the lack of unity between the operating systems make it harder for hackers to attack it, or would it make it less appealing for them?
It does. The operating system does matter, and you're exactly right. So despite your disclaimer that you don't know a lot about technology, it sounds like you do. Microsoft is definitely more, definitely has more vulnerabilities than many operating systems. Linux is generally held to be one of the more secure. Mac, a little bit not as secure. This is just, industry norm or general opinion on it. So I don't myself actually have a strong opinion about it, but it's just generally that Linux is the most secure, then Mac, and then Microsoft. So having a diversity of operating systems across the automotive industry will absolutely help make it more secure. The more diverse and different, that way you won't see a blanket attack. An interesting example of how using diverse systems and diverse ways of technology will absolutely help protect is, so for example, a major manufacturing company who shall remain nameless, they signed a malware, which essentially means they put their stamp of approval on it electronically. And they thought that they were signing a certificate, which is basically just signing off on a product. And then they used it, that certificate got deployed across like hundreds of thousands of their products, and it was just sitting out there for about 4 years before they even became aware of it. And it wasn't actually a security breach so much because nobody had actually activated the malware. It was like somebody just sent it out into the wild and forgot about it. So it was just sitting there. But they had to recall all of their certificates, which just cost them huge amounts of money. And it's because they didn't use different certificates across all of their products. And so a lot of that comes into just putting a little bit of forethought into how you go about your engineering, which is a great point for cybersecurity is, are you baking security into your engineering processes? So a little forethought can save you a lot of money and a lot of problems. So definitely diversity helps in your rolling out your security system. All right, awesome, thank you.